Okay, we are live. Everyone that's joined us today, welcome to a very, very special Warrior Women in Business podcast, episode number 56. For those of you that are new to Warrior Women in Business and don't know me, my name is Jasmine Sandler. I am the host of Warrior Women in Business, the podcast, and the founder of Warrior Women in Business, which is an organization that's very mission driven. The mission of Warrior Women in Business through this podcast and through events and through programs is really to help female entrepreneurs and women in the arts thrive. So my job is to bring in experts in different verticals, coming from different backgrounds, to share their stories. Warrior Women in Business has a lot of things coming up, so I'm just going to mention them up front. For those of you that are live tomorrow, we are a partner. If anybody knows anything about Warrior Women in Business, we do as much as we possibly can to help women and children in need. Tomorrow, we're a partner in the MAG Gala at the Plaza Hotel. If you haven't gotten tickets, we'll share information afterwards. But the MAG Gala raises money to help victims of domestic violence. We've been involved with that in the mayor's office for a few years. We also have on June 28th, for those of you in New York City, we are part of New York City Music Month through the mayor's office, and we are co-hosting an event of which Warrior Women, the song, will be broadcasted. So I'm pretty excited about it. Anyway, so enough about Warrior Women in Business, and hopefully that was very short. I really want to maximize our time with my guest today. So first of all, I want to thank Mr. Peter Cuneo for being on today. So you can wave and say hello if you'd like, Peter.
I'm very happy to be here, Jasmine. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't know Peter, which I think would be crazy, Peter he's really embodies a lot of what Warrior Women in Business, our mission is about, which is developing women as leaders. And becoming a leader, and Peter can definitely talk about this today, is no easy feat when you own your business or you're an executive. And there's lots of traits and characteristics that people talk about with leadership, like going back to actually Peter Drucker comes to mind. But I think what Peter does is he does an excellent job of distilling that down. So he has a podcast called SuperHero Leadership, of course. And we're going to talk about today his own 32 essentials of superhero leadership, of which I've been digging through in the last few weeks. He also, if you don't know, is the former CEO and vice chairman of Marvel Entertainment. We all know Marvel Entertainment, Marvel Studios, but maybe some of you comic book people that are on this podcast have no idea that it was in bankruptcy. And Peter led the turnaround, a multinational conglomerate, and helped to sell sell Marvel rather to Disney. Was that 2009, right? I think.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. For $4.5 billion. And everybody loves Disney. So they have to know where the Marvel story came from. I mean, for someone to do that means they have to make a lot of decisions and take risks. We're going to talk about that today. He's considered one of the world's top turnaround specialists, or turnaround CEOs, I should say, Peter. And he's turned around companies like Clairol. I don't know if you know, but I actually did marketing for them a long time ago. So I know the company, Black & Decker, and of course, Marvel. His SuperHero Leadership podcast, we're really going to get into today, where he has some really great guests on his podcast, leaders in different areas, talking about their leadership traits and how they got to where they are today. What else can I say about Peter? There's just so much to say. So I think I'm going to let him speak for himself instead of me being boring and talking all through this. So first of all, again, it's such a pleasure to have you on Warrior Women in Business. I only select a few men, so chosen few. And you've done so much in the world to impact business. But I think where I wanted to start is understanding your early beginnings and, what positions you held growing up, what career choices you made, and if you knew that you would eventually be in this position. So can you talk about that a little bit?
I'd be happy to. I think that actually, if one studies successful leaders, going to find out they have a lot of things in common in their early life. So I might want to talk a little bit about that. And of course, strong women played a very important role in my early life. I'm talking specifically about my two grandmothers and my wife. Excuse me, my wife's a strong woman too. We'll get to her later, but also my mother. Um, my two grandmothers were both immigrants, so they were very independent. One did not speak English. She came from Sweden in
Ah,
1900 on her own on the boat at age 20. And
ah,
um, my other grandmother was Scottish via Nova Scotia in Canada. She was a
mhm.
nurse and so on. And then, of course, they immigrated from Nova Scotia to the United States. I'm actually named after her husband, my grandfather, Peter McLeod. So
Wow.
um, I, as a young person, I grew up with two very strong grandmas who were very candid with me about what right and wrong, who had overcome a lot of challenges in their lives, as you might imagine,
Yeah.
and um, and so on, and so they had a strong influence in how I grew up and how I thought about things. Just as importantly, of course, was my mother. My mother was a very interesting individual. She was studying to be a nurse and married my father instead as World War II started. So she was a Navy wife. My father
Oh,
was an officer in the Navy in the South Pacific. Um, and uh, and so she didn't follow all of her aspirations. She was also a swimmer and diver working towards the Olympics. That, of
wow.
course, didn't happen. I think, though, the most interesting thing about my mother is she was a tremendously optimistic person. She was able to really roll with the punches.
Yeah.
And she raised me to be an optimist. My mother was also very into give back. My father was give back also. He was a lieutenant in the New York City Fire Department. My
Mm.
mother was an EMT for 30 years.
Wow.
The last 10 years, she was a dispatcher because the work was very taxing physically
Hmm.
and she couldn't do it anymore. My mother, she worked at the 4 to 12 shift uh, by a local Salvation Army hospital. And she would come at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night when I was a teenager, and she would put me in the back of the ambulance with her, and we would go out on calls. Now, this is way back when, the ambulances were not highly regulated like they are now.
Yeah.
And you typically had two male drivers in front. She was in the back,
Mhm.
and she put me in the back, and I was obviously didn't do anything but watch. And I saw my mother in action when, bad accidents on the highways, you name
Yeah.
it. I saw my mother in action. I saw my first dead body actually,
Wow.
getting out with my mother. And so I grew up, I didn't realize that there were any prejudices in the world about working women because
Yeah,
my
right.
mom, my grandparents, that was my life. I didn't ever think about it. And so one of the great gifts in a way my mother and my grandmothers gave me was when I went out into the world to work, I never had hangups with women. And unfortunately, because I go way back, there are a lot of males that had a tough time working with women, particularly smart women, women who, knew what they were doing.
Hmm.
And that was not, there weren't a lot of those women in business back then. And it was coming, but there was a lot, a lot of problems. Should also know that I married a very motivated, I would say, woman. I'm now married
I
50.
wouldn't doubt it.
I'm married for 53 years.
Oh,
A
congratulations.
wonderful, amazing woman. I got very lucky.
Yeah.
Um, I actually, I'll tell the story briefly. I met my wife at my sister's wedding,
Hmm.
and I was also a naval officer in the Vietnam War, so I was between tours. And my father had died, so I came home to give my sister away at the wedding. And my sister said, "Oh, you're going to meet my girlfriend Maris," and I didn't think much about that.
Hmm.
But we met at the reception, and I was going back in a week back to Pearl Harbor to get on my ship to go to Vietnam.
Mm.
And we were together for that week. And then I came back 7 months later, got off the plane, JFK, and we got engaged. I'd
Oh,
actually
I
only
love romantic stories.
physically seen her for like 10 days
Yeah,
before we got engaged. And I said to her, well, I got to go back. I got to come
yeah,
back in 6 months, and we'll get married. And she said to me, no, you don't know my family. She's a very big Irish family, also give back. All her, I think 9 uncles, all cops and firemen.
yeah, yeah,
This is all, and I think one of the reasons, Jasmine, that we clicked right away was we came from the same culture,
yeah.
the same values in our both
Yes.
families. Her father was a World War II vet, Bronze Star awardee. He was a sergeant in the police department. So we we were a little older. Today it doesn't sound old, but when we got married, I was 26, she was 24, and that was actually old.
Yeah, back
Today
then.
it would be young, but back then it was old. And we kind of knew what we wanted. We had our, let's say, flings, and it just clicked. And she was a working woman. That's how I met her with my sister. They both worked for an
Oh,
entertainment company in Manhattan,
oh.
and their desks were next to each other.
Hmm.
And that my sister was also a working woman her whole life, including chief administrator in a hospital.
Hmm.
That this is again for my mother, right? We just thought this is what women do.
Yeah.
Um, and so my wife's also very feisty. She's been a horse lady.
Oh, me
She
too.
she competed
Yeah.
in a hunter jumper,
Yeah, me
and
too. She sounds great.
my mother, my wife fractured skull being
Mm.
thrown by the horse
Yeah.
at a jump, being
Yeah.
the horse refusing at the jump, and she, as soon as she was ready, right back up on the horses.
Yeah.
That's her. Um, so I've always had, I have to say, wonderful women around me, for my life. So when I hired, I had no problem looking at resumes from women. And in places like Clairol, I want to make a point here. You mentioned that I turned around Clairol. I didn't turn around the whole company. I turned around two divisions of
Yeah,
Clairol.
I know they have multiple
Yeah,
divisions,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. So, but you know, I always wanted, this is kind of reverse prejudice at that time. I wanted women, particularly in marketing, because I couldn't imagine how men could understand emotionally hair coloring
Yeah.
or hot rollers, because we sold hot rollers, or you know, foot spas, or even shampoos and conditioners and so on. You know, I wanted women who emotionally would understand these products and would be much better at designing new products, I thought, than men,
Absolutely.
for the simple reason of the obvious reason.
Yeah.
And and
That's
so
interesting. So when you were in that engagement, when you started, was it mainly male decision makers? And
yes, yes.
oh, okay, I didn't know that.
Oh
That's
yeah.
interesting.
Oh yeah. Well, we're going back quite a ways. Okay.
Oh,
So I'm talking about the early 80s now.
okay.
And sure, there was mostly male decision makers. Um, Very interesting occurrence on my first turnaround, which was an international division of Clairol, and
Mhm.
which was not doing well. We could talk about this more later, but I have to tell you, one of my the, the really wonderful experiences for me in that was that I found that most of the people actually in that business were very good. It's just that past leadership had not allowed them to blossom. And I found a woman who was in marketing who I thought was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Long story short, she became when I got promoted, she became the head of the division.
Hmm.
And later on, she moved out of Clairol and was CEO of a lot of companies. You may remember Jaeger,
Oh
the
yeah.
she ran Jaeger for years, highly successfully. She unfortunately passed too
Oh,
young.
that's
I'm sorry to say, but that was an example of just finding, the right person, and left alone to do their thing. I love to tell you that was my leadership. I left her alone for the most part, you know, and
Yeah,
she
but
let
that
still
that's
do it.
that's an important trait of a leader as well.
Well,
I find.
sometimes, yeah, sometimes it is. If you find the right people that you can do that with.
Right. And we're
Sorry
gonna get
to
we're
run
gonna
on here, but I
yeah.
think this is one of the reasons I was very interested when you reached out to me
Oh,
to
okay.
be on your show, because I love the concept. And I love, when I went to Harvard Business School and I graduated again in the 70s,
Hmm.
only 4% of the class was women.
Yeah.
4%, 5%. Today
Yeah.
it's 50%. So it kind of shows you how it's changed for the better so much.
Yeah, it really has. I think my dad went to Harvard.
Mhm,
And back then there were, yeah, many women, and my mom went to an all women's college.
mhm,
But she became her own leader in her own right. And
yeah,
yeah, so I get it. And
yeah,
I love the story of all the strong women around you. And then you connected with your wife, and she's also a strong woman.
absolutely.
Okay, so we have a lot to talk about. I want to talk about business turnaround. Again, a lot of this show is education.
Mhm.
So a lot of listeners and members don't know what business turnaround is and how it works. Can you just talk a little bit about what that looks like, particularly in your areas of strengths, when you come in and you get asked to turn around a business? Like, what does it look like?
Mhm.
What areas
Sure,
do you touch? Just,
sure.
I know it's a broad question, but
That's a good question, though. I think when I say a turnaround, it means that a business is in trouble, and it may be financially in trouble, on the verge of bankruptcy, for example. It
mhm.
may not be so much financially in trouble as strategically in trouble. The, the sales are going down, something is wrong. The
Mhm.
owners, and if it's a public company, the owners are anybody that owns a stock.
Oh, yeah.
But when I started out, I was doing divisions of very big companies.
Mhm.
Clairol was owned by Bristol Myers Squibb. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So I started just doing divisions. You didn't have to worry about the cash so much because these are big companies with big treasuries, but
Oh,
you still, the businesses were underperforming, and the
oh.
powers that be were looking at them and saying, this, we should be doing much better. That we need to turn this business around. Sales should not be declining. They should
Hmm.
be going up, and et cetera, et cetera. So um, that's what I mean by a turnaround. It's a business. And by the way, we talk about business on your show, but it can be any leadership situation. It can
Yeah.
be a nonprofit, that's in trouble for various
Hmm.
reasons. But basically, I just uh, would I became very interested in turnarounds. In fact, I had no idea I had any skills in turnarounds. Most people will not take these jobs because of the risk, and I don't blame them. There's something wrong with me, Jasmine. I have to admit, something wrong.
You have to have something wrong
Because,
with you to be a leader.
well, I wouldn't go quite that far, but I know what
No,
you're
I'm
saying.
joking.
But
But it's good. I mean, it's
I
necessary.
I ended up enjoying being a fixer,
Yeah.
and so I've done 7 of these. Marvel is the
Wow.
one that gets the most attention because
Cool.
it's sexy, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
and so on. But there were 6 before that, including some
Mm,
overseas, which is harder to turn around because the social laws are very different in overseas than here.
absolutely.
And so a
So,
turnaround means fixing a company that
mhm.
is stressed financially, perhaps, stressed strategically, stressed sales, all of the above. And so that's what a turnaround means.
Okay. So when you go in, where do you start? Is it the people, the operations, the processes?
Well, it's very interesting because a lot of the turnarounds that I've done, I had no background in the actual
Oh, yeah.
industries they were in. And
Mm,
well, Marvel would be an example. I had no idea how to make a movie. I had no
right.
idea how to publish a comic book. Okay. That turned out to be a good thing because as I was learning, I could take a fresh look at the business and see what was
Right.
crazy about what the company was doing. What was crazy about the industries? Let me tell you, creative industries like that can be very crazy.
Oh,
And
I know.
but I had a very strong I want to make the point here. I will make it several times that someone who has success as a leader doesn't do it alone. Don't let anyone ever tell you they're so great. They just took charge and that was it. No, you need good people
Absolutely.
to work with you and for you. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
Sometimes you find them, they're there already. Sometimes you have to go out and hire them.
Mhm.
But the thing that I'm going to say that I always want to look for right away is, believe it or not, the culture of the company.
Mhm.
Okay. The culture of the company. And what do I mean? I mean the value system, how people think, what the company thinks is important. It's not just tactical and strategic changes, it's also how we work together, how we treat each other.
Mhm.
Okay. And and I like to say that in every turnaround I did, the culture was bankrupt when I came. The company may not have been
Interesting.
financially, but the
Mhm.
culture was completely wrong. And so that's what I would be looking at first off is, what went on? What are people saying about the future? How are they feeling? You know,
Mhm.
I would often talk to my direct reports, ask them, if you were me, what changes would you make? You can learn a lot about people, by the way, when they
Yes.
have to answer that question, you know.
Mm.
And I could tell from the answers who was going to make the trip with me and who wasn't. Really,
Right. Of
it's
course.
you learn a lot from that kind of thing.
Mm.
And so and it takes time to make a culture, change culture, because you're changing the way people think and the values that they have and that they believe in. And anyone that tells you change the culture with a snap of your fingers never changed it, never had to do that.
I went through a merger and acquisition when I was with IBM to
Yeah,
AT&T,
yeah,
and I saw two, it was like black and white cultures.
exactly.
And
Yep.
I tell you, that was,
Yes. It was a real problem.
it was a real problem.
And this still occurs, by the way.
Yeah.
This is really interesting. It still occurs. Um, I have AT&T bought Time Warner.
Yeah, yeah.
That was a disaster too.
Yeah, yeah, I remember.
Okay. You can't have engineers telling movie people what to do.
Right.
It doesn't work. And vice versa, by the way.
Mhm.
Yeah. So anyway, I would look for the culture and start to change it and talk about it. One of the biggest, I guess, tools that you have as a turnaround CEO, or any leader trying to make change, radical change in particular, is communications. It sounds funny to say that's a tool, but what I've always found in the situations I walked into is that the communications have been very bad with with the employees, particularly in a multinational. Most of these were multinational businesses,
Yeah, I can imagine.
and so communications didn't happen very often. They were very stilted. By that I mean on a very high level. They didn't come down to everybody else's level. Um, they were not consistent. But you can't. Bad leaders basically start communicating whoever they talk to last,
Yeah.
whatever they told. That's the new communication. No, you have to be consistent. Okay, if you believe in change, you have to be consistent and communicate often. Very, very important. I used to do pizza lunches. So
Hmm.
what's a pizza lunch? I'd get 10 people in the room with me from
Hmm.
all levels of the organization, from
Okay.
the lowest level up to someone who reports to me.
Okay.
And we would, get in a room for lunch, conference room, and we'd have pizza and salad or whatever brought in.
Yeah.
And I would talk about how the business is doing. If this was an hour, I might spend 20 minutes talking about the company. And then I would open the floor, if you will, to anyone who would want to ask me questions. And what's interesting is the first couple of times you do this, no one asks any questions.
I was gonna say,
The place is completely screwed up because
right.
they're afraid, because they
Mhm.
don't know me.
Yeah.
Let's
Oh,
be
that's
honest,
also true.
they don't know how I'm going to react.
Mm.
I could be very candid, and I might, turn out to be a guy who takes it out on them somehow. That happens. So what I would do with the first a couple was I'd simply say, well, I know there's no questions, but if I was sitting in your place, I'd have the following questions, and I'd ask
Oh,
myself
smart.
the questions and answer them. And then after three or four of these, all of a sudden, I'm starting to get questions.
Yes.
And what was really good about that is we don't kid ourselves, right? The minute that lunch was over, they were all on the phone to friends in the company telling them what I said.
Oh,
So I was talking, and yeah, is it as good as talking directly to 300 people? No, of course not. Because, Peter said this, or the next day I heard Peter say, it changes a little. But the idea was communicating on a regular basis is very important. And
yeah.
someone
Seems
came in
valuable.
when we were having a lot of success at Marvel, someone came in and wrote an article about me, and they called my leadership style leadership by walking around, because I would like to walk through the offices and talk to people. I didn't have everybody come to my office for every meeting.
Yes.
You have to be accessible, and so on. So communications will help you understand the culture and the changes you need to make. And some are obvious very quickly, and some are more subtle.
Mhm. Do you have one fun story you can share about Marvel that you think, and it could be women related or non-women related, that you think was something? I love the pizza story, by the way. I thought you were going to say you split up the pizza into slices and said you have to answer a question. That's where my mind went. But anyway, I'm crazy too. Um, but do you have one story that you love, something that you made a decision on or worked with somebody on that made a difference there, that was just something really interesting that you think people would want to learn about?
Let me say this, rather than an individual decision I made as CEO, let me talk about a couple of decisions that were
Sure.
made either by the board as a group.
Mhm.
Well, I'll tell one story, and I think particularly apropos to right now, and you'll understand why in a second. The culture at Marvel needed to be changed in many ways. One is, when you're in a creative business, basically you have to take risks. You just have to take risks. You can't.
Mhm.
If you're running a bank, it's a lot different, or something like that. But in creative businesses, it's new products are risky, right? But you have to try. Movies are risky.
Yeah, of
The
course.
comic book concepts are risky.
Yes.
They weren't. There was very little risk taking going on, and so
Um,
that was one of the changes. So we always said that our culture became changing the rules of the game. That meant that we were not going to compete or behave the way other people in the industry did.
huh.
And ultimately, we had a lot of success with movies. And then ultimately, we decided that we would form Marvel Studios,
Right.
our own studio.
Mhm.
And at the time, I had changed after almost 4 years as CEO to vice chairman of the board. And so one of my jobs as vice chairman was investor relations. And so I'm constantly talking to investors and analysts and what
Mm.
have you about the company. And it was no one thought we could be successful doing our own studio. How could little Marvel? Yeah, we had some
Uh,
good movies, and how could Marvel do what big studios do? And I kept
yeah.
saying, we not only can we do it, we could do it better. And I would explain why, and they still would they'd hear the words, but because it was 2 years before our first film was coming out. Okay, so
Mhm.
the first film is going to be Iron Man.
Right.
And it's obviously very important for this to be a hit. And we've raised $525 million,
Wow.
okay, for Marvel Studios. Okay,
Mhm.
so we have a lot on the line. And so one of the biggest decisions is who's going to be Tony Stark. Okay, so for those, I know your listeners don't necessarily know Marvel that well or at all.
Some do.
Okay. Tony Stark is Iron Man. Okay. So if you've seen the Avengers or some of the other shows, you know Tony Stark. And so this is the person that we cast for this role is going to be very important. It's our first film. We got to prove to the world.
Yeah, it's got to be a star.
So the people running Marvel Studios come to New York. I'm now sitting on the board, and we have a board meeting, and they say, we want to cast, the lead and the number one, the best male actor in Hollywood, we think. We're going, great.
Mhm.
Hey, you know, as long as he doesn't cost too much, you know.
Right.
But great, who is it? And they go, Robert Downey Jr. Now, you may not know this, but
Mm.
very shortly before this, Robert had a lot of problems.
No, I do know. I'm a Robert Downey Jr. fan.
Okay. He was
So
his
I know he
mug
got
shot.
into trouble.
His mug shot was everywhere. He
Yeah,
had problems. By
I
the
know.
way, what I hear, and I can't say this is true, but I believe it is. One of the reasons he's got himself together is he's got a great wife.
Yeah, he does.
Which he's been tremendously helpful. That's what I've heard. I can't personally testify, but he certainly has gotten it together. Anyway, so the board is going, are you guys nuts? Robert Downey Jr., you know, uh, and they say, we knew you'd feel that way. So we got Robert to do a screen test.
Mhm.
And the screen test is the start of the film. It's at first, I don't know, 6 or 8, 9 minutes. And he's right on script. And then he goes off and becomes in front of our eyes Tony Stark.
Mhm.
And when the lights come up, half of us think he is actually Tony Stark, you know? And
Oh, I know. Yeah.
and so the board was so impressed. The board said, let's do it. Hire him. And
It's
now that
great.
was a decision no one was, I can't say for sure, but I don't think a lot of job offers were coming his way.
I don't think so at that time,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah. And maybe none. I don't know. But
I'm so sorry.
yeah. So so we talk about changing the rules of the game, taking risks. That
Mhm.
is a huge risk by a lot of industry observers. And
Mhm.
guess what? Robert Downey Jr. was phenomenal. He's been phenomenal. Okay, we're talking now about 2007 is when the movie came out.
Yeah, that I remember it was,
Okay,
yeah.
so a while ago. In the intervening time, he's starred in many other films. He's had his Sherlock Holmes stuff. He's had many other great films that he's done, as well
Right.
as still being Tony Stark, all this time. And by the way, who won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor this year?
Right.
Robert Downey
Downey
Jr.
Jr.
So
He deserves it.
I feel really good about that decision we made. It was not a decision solely by me. It was a group.
It's funny because I don't think I could imagine, or anybody that follows that story could imagine anyone else in that role. It's interesting. I think he was the exact right
Yeah,
fit.
no, if you'd asked anyone on the board, we never would have come up with him as a candidate. But what we did a lot at Marvel, it was doing things differently. We just broke the rules.
Imagine that being a little bit fun in a creative
Well,
industry, being able
risky
to do
when
that.
you decide you're gonna just compete differently from what people have been doing for decades, and even generations. So, but
Yeah. I mean,
I
Marvel
think that's
Studios
very
itself is
important.
an example,
Excuse
breaking the
me?
barrier,
Yeah, yes.
and now I think fragmenting the movie industry, so if you will, with all this streaming I feel like that was the beginning from my perception. It's really
Well, we could talk a lot I mean, we can go in a lot of different directions here. One of the things, so a couple of things that I think are worth mentioning, even if you don't know anything about Marvel, you're a listener, or you might have, or comic books. When I decided to go to Marvel, you know, I of course do homework first. I don't just take a job. And
course.
Marvel had just come out of bankruptcy, and Marvel had 7,000 characters. Okay,
Wow.
now the A list might have been 10 or 12 characters, right?
Mm.
You know, the ones we all know. And the
Spider-Man.
B list might be 20. Okay. And they
Yeah.
have 7,000 characters, but many of them were in one comic book 40
Mhm.
years ago and never again. So
Yeah.
it's a little misleading to say 7,000 characters, but um, we again, it was all very different. What even I could see as an outsider made the Marvel characters more valuable than, say, other competing characters
Mhm.
was they were very different in one very important way. When Stan Lee and his editors in the uh, from 1961 to 1965, they created all those characters you know now.
Mhm.
And what made them different is they all were flawed. They all had, they all had powers, but many of them couldn't handle the powers.
Yeah.
Spider-Man gets his uncle killed because he gets arrogant about his powers. Um, the they're all flawed. They're all coping with problems. You got to know them because we were very important to tell the origin stories of each of the characters. This is how you get people emotionally connected to them,
Yeah, of course.
and so on. And people could relate to them. Every kid in high school thinks they're a mutant, thinks they're an X-Men.
Yeah.
Really, and it's natural, by the way. We all went through am I going to be
I'll go
popular?
through that
Look,
stage.
I'm pretty good at this, but no one knows it. Or maybe people won't like me if I let them know this part of me. And all of these different things, every minority group likes the X-Men because the X-Men are different. They're feared by other people because they're different. They don't know them, but they're feared by automatically, you know.
Hmm.
And so a lot of minority groups, I think, relate as well. So this is what made, though, the characters so you could people could really get behind them. You could not get behind Superman. Superman was omnipotent. You couldn't kill him. He could
That's
do
true.
everything. There was kryptonite was invented eventually years after Superman first came out because there was no tension.
Yeah.
Nothing. So I thought, oh my goodness, we've got an edge up with this intellectual property. And I was pleasantly surprised it was even better than I thought when I got inside the company.
So much value.
Yeah. Yeah. So you, it's uh, the name of the game in entertainment is owning or at least controlling your intellectual property.
Yes.
When
And
Marvel went
it's
through
such a creator
bankruptcy,
economy now.
yeah, when you go through bankruptcy, you get control back of your
Mm.
characters. That's part of the
Oh,
process. So
interesting.
Marvel coming out of bankruptcy had owned and controlled all these characters. So that was like you know, I don't know, a gold mine, really. And so, that's what I was part of what I was banking on when I went there.
Yeah, I mean, a company doesn't realize what they have until they break down. And it sounds to me like, having somebody come in like you to see those pieces, and I think you really eloquently talked about the culture, understand how to develop a better culture. Uh, so I mean, most of the women and people that I deal with in events and with Warrior Women in Business, they're generally smaller than a Marvel, but I think that they struggle with the same issues. They struggle with, number one is scalability, communication you talked about, and they're different because they're creating culture, right?
Mhm.
They have culture
Right.
already that needs to be fixed.
Yes.
So, what would be a bit of advice you could share with female entrepreneurs, maybe small businesses that have been around a while and perhaps they're stuck and they don't really, that's why I had you start with turnaround.
Mm,
Maybe they don't even know they need to be turned around and they've been existing flat for 10, 20 years.
mm. Well, it's better for women in business than it used to be, but there's still a way to go, I think.
Mm.
And but it's certainly come a long way. It's as I said, but no, I think you need to find mentor. The first thing for women, and you need to find mentors, and they can be male, but
Hmm.
also, of course, female. And you need to talk through these issues. I, everybody's situation is different. Everybody's personality is different. It's hard to give you just one piece of
No, of
advice.
course. Yeah,
One piece of advice does not fit all. Uh,
right.
but I also think that that I think you have to fight. I think you have to fight in some cases.
Yes.
And I don't mean start screaming and yelling when I say fighting, but when you're not being handled properly or treated fairly, you have to say so.
And
And on my podcast, I have interviewed two women who are amazing. Soledad O'Brien is a
mhm,
former um, anchor for CNN, but she's got her own company. She's
mhm,
doing great work.
mhm,
She's devoted a lot of social issues. She's a great person. She has a very interesting background with her mother and father were multi cultural.
mhm.
Um, um, they had five kids, and all five went to Harvard.
Wow, that's tremendous.
Yeah, it's a great story when you get into the details. But she's a terrific lady with great values. She has, by the way, a nonprofit devoted to taking young women who are capable of great things and getting them into great colleges and Ivy League schools and other things, and they do really well. Um, and also Trisha Wilbur is not a name everybody knows, but Trisha was the chief marketing officer for Disney in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa for 10 years.
Yeah.
And imagine a woman, 40 countries. Imagine
Mhm.
a woman, some of those countries, cultures do not accept women in business at all. And
No,
and then you've got to take these
certainly not the Middle East.
Marvel characters and Disney characters and make them relevant,
Hmm.
and so on. And when she retired, the sales for her area was something like $22 billion.
Wow.
And if you meet Trisha, she's not one to tout herself or
Yeah.
whatever, but I think some of your listeners would be very interested in hearing Soledad and Trisha talk on
Yeah,
that.
that's I listened to the
Yeah,
episode. It's a
yeah,
great episode. I definitely will. We'll put that in the show notes because I think uh it's something for women to strive for and pick things up because we have, women the way that we run companies, we have similar traits. And so I find that your guests probably have had to make difficult decisions, but they've also utilized those female traits, right?
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's talk about the Superhero Leadership Podcast. Let's talk about your 32 essentials of
Yep.
superhero leadership, right?
Yep.
I chose four that I really like based on the women that I generally work with and myself as well. So the first one I want to talk about is being decisive to a fault. I loved that because I feel that, and clients I've worked with and women that I see sometimes have a hard time making decisions for the fear of making the wrong decision or stopping before they hit success because a lot of the decisions haven't worked out. Or maybe they don't even know how to make a pros and cons list. So talk to us a little bit about that trait,
Yeah.
being decisive to a fault.
Well, let me preface everything with a little background on how
Sure,
the
yes.
essentials came to be.
Okay, yes.
When I was still CEO of Marvel, this goes back 20 years, maybe a little more. I'd gotten a request to give a speech on leadership to a big group. And it's interesting because I'd never really done this before. And
Mhm.
frankly, didn't think much about lessons I'd learned or my leadership. It's for me, it was all a big adventure, going from one thing to the other.
Mhm.
And I had a long flight overseas, 11 hours nonstop. And I got on this flight. This is before I I had to give the talk, and I thought to myself, my goodness, what am I going to say? You know? And
Yeah.
I guess I went into a trance. And for about 9 hours, I was writing out these essentials that I thought that I had learned. And by the way, many of them the hard way by making mistakes.
I'm sure.
And you know, the these essentials are really behaviors, they're philosophies, they're attitudes. Okay.
Mm.
And so for the listeners, they're one-liners. 32 of them fit on 2 pages. And again, they're listed on petercuneo.com on the podcast if you would like to go see them. There were 28 at the time, and I've added 4 over the past like 20 years, uh, and so on. And I like these because they're things that I think to be a successful leader that you have to practice or at least be passable. And I often tell people take the 32 and grade yourself, but you have to be honest with yourself.
Mhm.
Okay. How are you doing? I do tell people that even after all these years, I don't give myself straight A's at all. And because of certain, shall we say, challenges I have in my personality, some of these I can never be better than a C or a C plus. It's just, and I work hard, and I work hard to be a C. Okay.
Yeah, I get it.
Um, Others, yeah, I feel a lot better about what I do, but only you will know what your grade is. And if you pull this out every couple of months and review them again, it doesn't take long. See
No.
how you're doing. See how you're doing. So you've picked a couple here. So let's go back and talk
Yeah,
about.
no, thank you. I should have prefaced it.
No,
And I feel that for me anyway, when I'm moving, like on a train or a plane, is the best time to start thinking. I always talk to my clients about that. I have them do discoveries for marketing and they say, I don't have the time to do this. I'm like, get on a plane or do something. I love that you said you went into a trance, honestly. It's like, whoop, here it
good.
comes, the 32 essentials.
It's kind
And
of
we'll put
weird.
that in the show notes too, your website and where to find them, of course.
Okay.
So let's
So
start with the number
yeah,
one,
be
being
decisive. Yeah.
decisive.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
How can we practice this? Let's talk.
So um this is actually an essential that follows another essential. And the the first essential says, you know, try basically try to convince, your organization about the, the direction you want to go, and listen, get their feedback. And then this one says, but be decisive for a fault,
Okay.
because in a turnaround, particularly the ones I do, you can hem and haw forever and not make a decision, and you're killing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
To your point, Jasmine, sometimes making a decision is very hard for people, but leadership, the key word to go along with leadership is courage. It takes courage to be a leader,
Yes.
because you know that you if you make a lot of decisions, and I always had to in a turnaround, and I would tell people, guess what? Some of the decisions I made are going to turn out to be wrong, because no one can get every decision right. And when we figure out they're wrong, don't worry about me. We'll change them.
Mm.
We'll fix them. And of course,
Mm.
people would never believe me at first when I say that, till I
Yeah.
proved it with my actions. So you but you have to be decisive. You have to make change, create change, and it's very, very important. And you just you're going nowhere if you don't make a move. Try work with people first, of course. I don't like forcing anything down anybody's throat. It's really not a good thing.
No.
But in the end, sometimes you're just going to have to be, as
Mm.
we say, decisive here. And a turnaround, you can't, you have to move forward as quickly as you can. I used to run into, as an example, um, I'll give you a typical example. So we have a new product, and there's 4 different packaging alternatives.
Okay.
And normally, if you were doing fine, you'd do research. You take those packaging alternatives
Yeah.
out to consumers, get a
Mhm.
reaction, focus groups, whatever, etc. But you're in a turnaround. One, you have no time to wait. Two, you have no money to spend on research.
Yes.
So you get in a room and you with other people, that have background and expertise, and you make a group decision on the spot, basically. I mean, after an hour discussion of mulling these things over. And I have had, and you know what? Most of the time you're right. But I've
Yeah.
had people who, including people I've hired from the outside, who could not pull, pull the
Sure.
trigger. And they were great in big corporations with lots of money and time. But coming to this kind of an environment, they they couldn't do it emotionally.
I feel like that's a superhero characteristic of entrepreneurs. In a sense, they can
Sure.
make decisions. I mean, they make a lot of bad decisions, but
Well, I think so this being decisive, and I think that's part of a cultural change as well. It's not just you personally, but it's your organization,
okay.
people in it to be decisive. Come knocking on your door or coming to your cubicle or whatever form it's taking, getting on a Zoom call. We got to make a decision, you know, coming after you to make a decision. That's when you know you've really made the leap. Okay.
Wow.
This is
Yeah.
a problem. We have to fix it. We got to do something, Peter, now. So um hard to do. That's why it's on this list.
Yeah.
But
I picked it first because I think it's the hardest
yeah,
to do.
well,
I wanted people to hear it from you.
there's
I think it's
there's
critical.
I just want to think, I'm looking here. I think you may, yeah, yeah. There's one other one that I always think is even harder, and it's number 18, which is being emotionally comfortable with the fact that
Hmm.
making change will upset other people. And in
Mhm.
some cases, they'll never forgive you. I don't say that in the thing, but the change upsets human beings, even quote, good change can upset people. And
Right.
you'll just have to live with the fact that there'll be people who will be very unhappy with whatever you're doing.
Hmm.
And you have to be comfortable and live with that. You don't have to like upsetting people, of course
Yeah.
not. But if I move in a turn, I move manufacturing from the United States to Asia,
Mm.
there's some people in manufacturing that'll lose their jobs.
Yeah.
I'm saving everybody else's job. Why? Because the competition is going there, and the same products we make in the US cost half as much to make in Asia. So what happens when we're on the shelf, let's say in Walmart, at
Mm.
$100, and they got the same product with the same features for $50?
Right. You lose
And
market
made in
share fast.
America is nice, but most people are not going to buy made in America for twice the price. Okay,
Right.
so you have to move. It's not even really like you decided I'm just going to do it. You have to move. So you're going to have people who lose their jobs in manufacturing, are not going to like you. You're going to be very unpopular with them. But ultimately, all the other people that kept their jobs and then the turnaround does well, you know, they're not going to thank you, but they're happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Okay, so let's move on. I love the next one I chose because this is a goal of most business owners, I think. You have always hire world-class people, never settle. So for the business owners that are growing their businesses, or a lot of the women that I work with are executives who are now at the stage where they want to start a new venture,
mhm.
which is fun.
Yeah.
How do you first of all, what's a world-class person to you based on all the experience that you have? And I know it changes per industry and company, but just kind of in general. And how do you not only hire them, but I would say retain them if you're, How do you retain them for the long term as well?
Yeah, well, so let me say, first of all, most people, world class or not, don't want to come to a turnaround. It's too risky. So when I was looking to fill important positions in the companies that I was working on, one
Mhm.
of the things I found is that search firms could never help me.
Yeah, yeah.
They couldn't, they don't, they don't really know who is emotionally prepared to cope with a turnaround or a difficult situation or job that needs change,
Hmm.
okay, or not.
Yeah.
So I had to try to find them myself, and I would do it mostly by talking to people I knew or getting leads from other people.
Yeah.
Who's, I might even read an article about somebody and call them up, you know,
Hmm.
and so on. As far as being world class, and let me just say on this one, this is the hardest. This is really a hard one. And I'll be honest with you, I put never settle, but I probably should have put try to, because no one can find world class people for every job. You can find adequate people.
Yeah.
World class, and I'd be lying if I told you no problem. I always found world class people. No, I didn't. Okay. But I think it's more about that's where you should start. You know, most
Right.
people don't start there. They don't. They're looking for adequate people.
Yeah, that's
See,
true.
you see, Jasmine, there's a word that I don't particularly like. It's called average. I don't like the word
I
average.
hate try and average personally, but yeah.
Okay, well, average to me, and that's again part of the cultural changes that I often had to make. I would come to an organization, and average was okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to create some advertising for our product. We tested it with consumers, and it's fine. It's the same as that big competitor we have. They test the same. No, it's not fine.
Right.
It's not. But you come into an organization again. It's cultural, and they average is okay. Well,
Right.
if you're only going to aim at average, sometimes you won't even hit average.
Hmm.
Okay, it's just common sense in a way. But so anyway, so world I so when I'm looking for world class, of course, it's a whole bunch of different things, but it's mostly it's their background and what have you, but it's also their personality. Can they
Hmm.
exist? Have they been in tough situations before?
Hmm.
I actually, and sometimes I'll even ask them about their childhood. We talked a little bit about my childhood,
Right.
but I'm looking for certain leadership traits, that again, I think that you find you know, um, that that come to you as a child, and how you're raised. Um, and my parents, another thing, I was raised with zero prejudices. I never heard a single word about
Great.
anybody based on their color, their sexual orientation, their ethnic background, their religion. All I heard was there's good people and bad people in the world. You have to figure out who the bad ones are.
It's
And
great
so I
advice.
went out into the world with none of that baggage on my back, no preconceived notions.
Right.
I traveled a great deal. My father was called up in the Navy, and in 2 years, when I was young, I lived in Pensacola, Florida,
Mhm.
Bremerton, Washington, which is near Seattle, San Diego, and Philadelphia.
Mhm.
So, and I did, elementary school, you know, over those 2 years in those cities. And I
Yeah, I get
learned,
it.
and I learned
Hmm.
that there were even cultural differences in the US. And I had to make friends, figure 6 months in each location roughly. I had to make new friends every time.
Yeah.
And I saw there were differences, but I was able to make friends every time. So because of that experience, I became comfortable as a young person dealing with different colors, different religions, different, whatever. And I didn't think anything about it. So I'm always looking for people who have that same attitude,
Yes.
because they're going to be flexible. They're going to look outside the box, if you will.
Yes.
And because I think the whole issue of diversity is a huge one and very important to have in your organization, a diverse organization.
I think it's a mandatory
I agree.
moving forward, and not just to have it, right? It's the present and future tense, I think. I mean,
Yep, absolutely.
it's where life is going, and I really like that. First of all, it's that your story is so more interesting than when we first spoke to me now, because I understood the woman part. You told me about your mom the first time we spoke, and now the grandmothers, and then tying in the, that you had the no preconceived notions, almost like you had the sandbox with no boundaries.
Yep.
And I love that. And I love that. And I think that's why these traits, these essentials rather, um, they're definitely you, and so many people can learn from them. So I'm just gonna keep going. Okay, the next one I chose, and I don't want to take it out of context, but I may have, so apologize if I do, but knowing the difference between managing and leading, and I think you talk about managing things, machines and things, versus leading people. So is that about not managing people, or let's talk about that a little bit, because it was interesting to me.
So again, I only use the word leadership when it comes to human beings. I don't use management,
Got it.
whatever. It's always
Um,
leadership or leading. Because you can manage other things. I think I say you can manage cash, you can manage machines, you can manage
right.
inventory, you can manage things. The big thing about them is they'll do whatever you want and they don't talk back to you. They
Nope.
don't question your decisions. But people are very different. And there's so many leaders that don't see the difference. Okay. They'll talk
Mhm.
to the people in their organization as if they were machines, as if they don't recognize the emotional side of this. And people, while the machines won't question your decisions, people will. And that's absolutely their right. And
Yep.
that's okay. It's absolutely okay. And you want to know what they're thinking anyway. You want to have a dialogue. Okay. And so, yeah, I think you lead people. And that's why I say you lead people, but you manage things.
And I got a question about that leadership. So in a growing company, if you're leading things,
Mhm.
you know, how do you scale yourself as a leader? You lead 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, and then you have multiple departments. So is there anything you could share about that piece as you grow as a leader?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, I think your time management really matters. But as you get bigger in an organization, you still want to keep in touch with the people that you work with and that work for you as much as you can. Obviously, if it gets very large, you can't necessarily communicate with everyone directly personally. It's not possible. But
Yeah.
also, you instill the people that work for you to think the way you do. So they're doing what you used to do. Okay, this is all part of the culture.
Right. That goes back to the world-class people.
Yeah, well, that's true too. Yeah, and then they will ultimately, if they have the right people, they'll pass that down as well. And so you have less leading to do, with them. And as you go higher in the organization, sometimes you have to lead your boss or lead your peers
Yeah.
when you get high enough, because your success will depend on your peers in many cases,
Yeah,
how they
absolutely.
do, and then there's always politics and everything else.
Mhm.
How do you tell your boss that they're screwing up? That's a tough one, right? So
Yeah.
you'll spend more time looking sideways and upward as you go higher in the organization. Not that you want to get away from your organization, but you depend and you train people below you to, if you will, pass on, the and communicate, pass on the culture.
So it sounds like everyone needs to know about leadership because essentially even if they're leading a small team, they need to know how to lead as well, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Because I've seen
Absolutely.
that screw up, pardon my language. Many companies I've done digital marketing for.
There's also
There's
something,
not so many leaders, there's so many managers and to-dos, and then they have these leaders and
yeah. And
it's not.
sometimes it's not about actually having people reporting to you. There's something
Mm,
called thought leadership,
right.
basically, which is can be very difficult. You're trying to convince people that don't work for you of a certain that the organization or they individually should take a certain direction. And you know, so and in every organization there are thought leaders that don't have anyone working for them,
That is true.
you know. So
Mm,
they have an important role too.
absolutely. Okay. The last, not saying that all of these essentials aren't important, but we would be here for hours. So the last one I have on the essentials is know when it's time to go. And that really struck me. It goes back to the decisions because a lot of listeners here are either, again, female executives going into a new venture, and believe me, they're scared, or they are executives that are on boards and possibly doing a venture, and they're in that executive role, they're ready to make the leap, but they don't know if they should go because they're looking at the economy and other things. So that one I'd love for you to chime in on. Know when it's time to go.
Yeah. Well, very, quickly in my case, I'll just talk about my knowing you got to know yourself to some degree. And I understood after a couple of turnarounds that I really couldn't run a good company. I, I'm the wrong person.
Mm,
But I was addicted to these turnarounds and I was addicted to success through teamwork.
yeah.
And I really got psychically, I got tremendous, you feel very good about things we had that success. And so, I think that, that was really key. And so I think that with women, and again, it's hard for me to put myself in the place of how women should think necessarily, but I do think that women generally wait too long. They have too many. Some of them have tendency to come up with more objections than reasons to make a change. I lasted an average of 3 years on every turnaround, and the
Oh,
3 years was I
3 years
knew.
is not a long time.
Well, I knew at that point that if I got run over by a truck, the company would do absolutely fine without me.
Mm.
And so that's my time to go, to look for the next adventure, if you will.
Mhm.
And I I, I think that some of the women I work with, and by the way, women, of course, have other challenges that men don't have. There's family, there's
Yes.
children, there's having children, all of those tough decisions and staying home or not, you know,
Yeah.
those are not, those are very tough. Those are decisions men don't have to cope with. They may be part of it, but it's not their body. It's not, it's very different. But and because of those things, I think it's harder for women to make a decisive decision, to make a change. Um,
Yeah, you hit the nail on the
but
head.
but having said that, I mean, I think most human beings know when, they've gone as far as they can go, they've learned as much as they can learn, they've progressed as far as they can go in a certain organization,
Yeah.
sometimes for reasons that have nothing to do with them personally at all, you know. Um, but the pyramid gets narrower and narrower, and sometimes it's just not enough good jobs, and you have to go elsewhere.
Hmm.
And I'm a hard one to talk to in this because I constantly changed. One of the things I like to talk about when I talk about leadership and talk about traits of great leaders is that if you study great leaders, they're all comfortable in what I'm going to call alien environments. Now, I don't mean alien bad. I just mean alien different.
That's right.
Okay.
Hmm.
And I like to talk about the fact we all live in a cocoon or we live in an eggshell.
Huh.
And that's the area where we feel comfortable about ourselves. Generally, we do most of the same things every day. We feel we're doing pretty well. We feel loved or liked, or our personal life is pretty good. Our professional life is pretty good. But something breaks the eggshell. Now you can break the eggshell by yourself. By okay, I've only worked in New York City my whole life. I just took a job in London. You
Yeah.
broke your eggshell. It's an alien environment, not different, not bad necessarily. But sometimes the eggshell gets broken by forces that you didn't choose. Someone gets sick. Someone, something happens in the company. The company's not doing well. There's a shakeup in the company. There's all sorts of reasons why your eggshell can get broken. And suddenly you're in an alien situation.
Mm.
But great leaders actually almost enjoy being thrown into alien environments. Unexpected problem. When
Mm.
I was one of the turnarounds I did, um, I was on the job a very short amount of time, and um, we sold products to mass retailers, drugstores, etc. And our
Mm.
biggest customer in the U.S., and you can guess who it is, doesn't matter,
Right.
decided
Well,
one that
yeah.
our products. This is I'm a month on the job. Here's what I hear from the head of sales. Our products quality is lousy. So consumers are returning them, which of course upsets the retailer.
Yeah, of
Are
course.
too high priced. I mean, this is unbelievable.
Like
And
everything.
and we promised this
Mm.
particular retailer a whole bunch of goods for an ad they're running, and we can't come up with the goods. So
Oh.
they're running an ad with consumers for a product that doesn't exist. Okay. I mean, this is what I get.
Yeah, that's not fun.
And Mike, not that I was in a big, you know, a big eggshell after a month in the business. No, no.
Oh, yeah.
But all of a sudden, your number one customer, and they're throwing us out because of this. And so my eggshell was burst. I had to do a lot of things. We eventually got in and did very well, but it took me 6 months to even get to start to get in that retailer's good graces. Um, but we did finally, and in the end, because of change in culture, we actually overperformed. We did much better than we were doing even before they threw us out. So, but good leaders go with the flow, you know,
Yes.
and they almost welcome problems. I don't want to say anyone really welcomes problems, but they're not put off
I
by.
think they must expect problems. No.
Yeah, and I would tell people when I would go to a turnaround, I would say that bring me your problems. You'll get in trouble with me if you don't tell me about your problems. What I worry about is not the problems I know about, it's what I don't know.
Mm.
Because we can fix 95% of the problems ourselves if we know about them.
Yeah. It reminds me of the last guest I had on was Shannon Lee of Bruce Lee's daughter. She has a book, and I listened to the whole thing because I feel like as a business owner, I need to understand flow better.
Right.
And and it seems so easy, yet it's so hard. So it's really interesting. So I
Yeah.
love what you said about that, expecting problems or leaning into problems and going with the flow.
Look, and it's human nature not to want problems. Of course, none of us really want problems.
Yeah.
But certain people are turned on by the challenge of fixing things. It gets, they get wound up. And so on. So when there are problems, no issue. And you see that again, if you study great leaders, you'll see that they were not put off at all.
No, absolutely not. Okay, so we only have a few minutes left. I ask all my guests this question, and I actually love asking men. When I reached out to you, first of all, thank you for accepting being on the podcast and sharing your wisdom. I know it's going to help a lot of people, not just today, but in the future. Um, What did you think of the term warrior women in business? What do you think of the term?
Well, I like warrior because I think women do need to be more of a warrior. And we've touched on that a little bit, you know. And uh, I I mean there are a lot of attributes, well, a lot of superhero warriors, so that are women. And I think it's great. I think uh, women have to, you know, want to be recognized, want to be appreciated. If they don't, they're not going to go very far. But sometimes, you have to push, you know, push for change, push to be recognized.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Absolutely.
think that's very important. My my wife was a working woman. Her mother was a working woman, and they worked in places that were dominated by men and industries dominated men. Trucking, okay?
Oh, wow.
This is
Yeah, truck.
go back and 30,
I
40, 50 years. And there still aren't many, I think, women driving
was going
trucks.
to say there aren't many
Yeah.
female
Yeah.
truckers.
And I don't know about female executives even, but they would tell me stories, talk about sexual harassment.
I can't even imagine that.
Yeah. And so and I've had to cope with sexual harassment on a number of my businesses that I went into.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I women would come in my office and very nervous, and I could tell, and they would tell me what was going on. And I think that in that case, I talk about decisive. I didn't bother with, you know, doing doing research and having people from the outside come in, because very often the men would come in and I'd sort of play a role with them about women
Oh,
and so on, and they'd admit it.
really?
They were proud of it, so it was easy for me to fire them immediately.
Really?
Oh yeah,
That,
you got
that's the first
remember
I've ever heard
I
of
go
that.
back a few years, okay?
Oh,
But,
well, of course.
we've come a long way on sexual harassment,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
again, still have a way to go. But
Oh, we
but
do, but we have come a long way.
yeah,
That's kind of surprising though. But I guess the culture, things were so different.
yep.
Okay, so we've talked about leadership. We've talked about your podcast. I love the stories that you shared. And I'm very action oriented. So I'd love for people to take advantage of this. Also, we lightly touched on it that you do speak at organizations. So how can my listeners, those that are watching, take advantage of the 32 essentials? What do you have coming up on the podcast? And anything else that you want to share, please share.
Thank you. Well, but we're just getting ready for season 2 of the podcast. I think it'll be, I don't know, a month or two before we start.
Okay.
But the podcast is all about learning from outstanding leaders, whether you know their names or their names you don't know, the people who have proven themselves, regardless of their gender or background or whatever. We've and you know, I think this is important for people. The way you learn leadership, though, ultimately, as we talked about, it's face-to-face communication with a diversity of people in your personal
Mhm.
life, your professional life,
Yes.
geographically, diversity in job. That's how you learn the instincts of leadership, how to influence
Mm.
effectively, positively other human beings. And so on. So that's what the podcast tries to do. I still do speaking engagements. I was down in Miami last week
Oh, nice.
to a group. Happened to be a bank, 280 people in the audience. It was a fireside chat
Okay.
format. I do all manner of formats, and I don't really care.
Yeah.
I do have an agent,
Mhm.
so that works on this stuff.
Okay.
And I was also in Miami the day before, and I did an interview on Sirius XM, which
Yeah, I saw that.
I think it aired yesterday.
Yeah.
With a guy named David Webb, who's a friend on something
Nice.
called the Patriot Channel, and that was also a lot of fun. So I'm also chairman of 3 companies. Excuse me. One is public, so I'm still working in that role. I'm
Oh,
also on the
excellent.
boards of 2 nonprofits, the
Okay.
National Archives in Washington, National Archives Foundation. And the National Archives keeps all the records of the US government. Last count, I think it was 22 billion, not million, billion documents.
Jeez.
Largest collection of antique maps of film, of
Oh,
photographs in the world.
that's so interesting.
Um,
Hmm.
we also, and if you ever go to Washington, go to the headquarters. It's a great place to visit. You'll see the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and so on. But there are many great exhibitions always going on there. And I love history. And I talked about, looking back at great leaders, and I've always loved history and tried to learn from history. And so I recommend history to anybody that will listen. And
I
so,
ag- I agree with you. That sounds like a good warrior women trip, honestly.
yeah. And then I'm on the board of the National Police Institute,
Hmm.
which is in Washington also. The Police Institute is a nonprofit, not independent organization that does research to improve policing. And
Oh,
I might tell you a quick story actually in that regard, with regard to women.
okay.
So policing is a very tough job, as you might imagine these days. Police departments just can't seem to win. They do a lot of good work. I'm very pro-police, but I am the first to admit there are changes needed. And so we do a lot of independent research, and we publish our research and our findings and recommendations. So let me give you one that I think particularly applies. So
Okay.
we did research some time ago. The situation that actually results in the most fatalities for men and women police officers every
Mhm.
year in the United States is
Mhm.
not, car stops. It's domestic abuse,
Oh, yeah.
domestic calls.
You know, yeah.
Okay. And of course, we did this research, and you're not going to be surprised, Jasmine. The
Well,
research showed that women police officers are much more effective at defusing a hot situation than the men were.
yeah.
And in addition, the women involved would say things to the women police officers, okay, that they would never say to a man.
Yeah, that's really
Okay.
interesting. True.
And so our recommendation was that there be some specialized training for women, whether they're on a beat, in a patrol car, or maybe in big, in big cities, you could have
Yeah.
what you do with hostage situations. You could have people are specifically coming in to handle, those situations. So I was recently at the 110th precinct in New York City. So I do work also with the NYPD.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. You mentioned that previously.
And I wanted to visit a precinct because it makes me smarter when I talk to them about leadership, because I know what they're going through. And I
Yeah.
work with the top leaders. There are 29,000 police officers in New York City, and I work with the top 125.
Wow.
And so I was with the precinct commander. So 110th is in Corona, Queens, and it's
Yeah,
a Latino neighborhood.
I know it.
Okay, yeah, the Latino neighborhood. And so I met all the different departments. I went out with police officers in the car, and it was a great day. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
But the thing that I remember most is, as I'm getting a tour in the precinct, we come to the um, domestic violence or abuse or domestic situation group. And it's 5 detectives. 4 are women, and the sergeant who runs the place is a woman,
Oh, wow.
and 4 of the 5 speak Spanish.
Hmm.
And I was thrilled. Now, I'm not saying that they took I really don't know. I think in New York City, they might have done this on their own anyway.
Yeah.
But the idea that we had come up with this research and that I could see something similar in action made me feel very good. But again, here's a situation where women And by the way, the NYPD is extremely diverse.
Oh, I know. I
All the
mean,
way up, all the way up to the top.
I notice it every
So,
time I see new recruits. And
yeah, yeah. It's
I say, well,
every
this to me is the most
conceivable.
diverse organization I've ever
Right,
seen.
right.
It's
And
great. I mean, you need
it
it.
is great.
You need to be diverse here
It is
in the
great.
city.
So, um, so even the people, the top 125 I work with are very diverse, you know. And I was recently talking to the chief who runs the subway patrol, okay, which is a big
Oh,
job. There's like 350 subway stops or whatever it is
I know
in New
them
York
all.
City. And actually, there's very little crime, but unfortunately, the reputation is the opposite.
Yeah, I think it's funny when people call and say, "Are you okay?" We
Yeah,
saw this on on TV or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
And
One
I say,
million
I've
people.
lived here for 20 years, and if there's 20 incidents, come on. I mean,
Exactly right. You made
millions
my
of people
point.
ride the subway and millions of things happen.
Yeah,
I think they do a great job.
yeah. I'm
And you
on the
don't, if you
subway all
don't
the
notice
time in
it,
New
that's a
York.
good thing. Right.
Yeah, so yeah, a million people ride the subway every day, and there's one
Yes.
incident that gets national attention. Everyone thinks the subways are not safe, but they are. But the
Mhm.
chief of the subway is a black woman,
Okay. Oh, I didn't
and I
even know.
was knocked out by her. Very impressed. Very
Good for
impressed.
her.
So anyway, well, it's so nice to for you to have me on, Jasmine. I appreciate it very much. I hope I didn't bore anybody, but
I doubt
thank you so
anyone
much.
was bored.
Okay. Well, best of luck to you and to your listeners. And
Thank you.
as they go forward, just remember what Spider-Man said. With great power comes great responsibility, and with great responsibility comes great power. And that is why courage is needed in leadership.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to thank you tremendously for being on. Also, I've been encouraging people to listen to your podcast. I listen to most of the episodes. I love the guests, honestly.
Mm.
It's like they're all so unique and interesting and exciting to me, as a kind of a business nerd. But I'm going to encourage everybody to listen in, and congratulations on the next season of Superhero Leadership Podcast. Also, I in the show notes we'll put all the information that Peter mentioned today for episode 56. And tomorrow night we are fighting against domestic violence at the Plaza Hotel with Mag Gala. It's something we do annually. It's
Mhm.
very important. I didn't know all this about the police, Peter.
Mm.
Uh, I feel like there's so many ways that they can get involved with all the things that we're doing to
Mhm.
help women and families defeat domestic violence, have safe places to go, and be able to work and have careers in New York City. So that's happening tomorrow night on Warrior Women in Business, is also all of our other events. So again, I want to thank Peter Cuneo for being on and spending an hour with us. Very generous. And I hope all of you take a look at his 32 Essentials of Superhero Leadership, listen into the podcast, and reach out at petercuneo.com.
All right.
With all that being said, I want to say thank you and goodbye from Warrior Women in Business, podcast episode 56.
Okay. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Peter.